The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as SEAL Team 7 descended toward the remote mountain village. Inside the aircraft, 6 elite warriors checked their weapons one final time. Among them sat the team's medic, his hands steady as he organized his medical kit. His teammates knew him as the quiet one, the guy who could patch up a bullet wound under fire and never lost his cool. Had been with the team for 3 years. He was the kind of medic every soldier wanted watching their back. When bullets started flying, would crawl through hell to reach a wounded teammate. His medical bag contained everything needed to keep a man alive until they could reach a proper hospital. The other team members often joked that had magic hands because he could fix almost anything. Team leader Jake glanced at and gave him a thumbs up, trusted completely. In their last mission, had saved 2 lives when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. While explosions went off around them, worked calmly to stop bleeding and stabilize injuries. The team called him their guardian angel. The mission briefing had been simple. Intelligence reports suggested that a high-value target was hiding in a small village near the Pakistan border. The target was believed to be planning attacks against American forces. SEAL Team 7 was tasked with capturing him alive if possible. It was supposed to be a routine operation for such an experienced team. As the helicopter approached the landing zone, felt the familiar knot in his stomach. Not from fear of the mission ahead, but from something much deeper. Something he had buried so far down that most days he could pretend it didn't exist. The village they were approaching had a name that sent chills down his spine, though none of his teammates noticed his sudden tension. The team rappelled down into the darkness, their night vision goggles turning the world green. They moved like shadows through the rocky terrain, each man knowing his role perfectly. Stayed in the middle of the formation, ready to provide medical support if needed. His training had taught him to focus on the mission, but tonight his mind kept drifting to memories he had spent years trying to forget. 15 years earlier, a much younger had been a different person entirely. Back then, his name wasn't. Back then, he had been known by a different name in a different world. A world where violence was a way of life and loyalty was measured in blood. A world he had escaped from, or so he thought. The village they were entering was called. For most of his teammates, it was just another dot on the map. For it was the place where his old life and new life were about to collide in the most dangerous way possible. He had hoped he would never see this place again. He had prayed that his past would stay buried forever. As they moved through the narrow streets, recognized landmarks that shouldn't have been familiar to a kid from Texas, which was what his military records claimed he was. He knew which houses belonged to which families. He knew where the wells were located. He knew the shortcuts through the maze-like alleys. This knowledge terrified him because it meant his secret was about to be exposed. The team reached their target building without incident. It was a modest house made of mud bricks and surrounded by a low wall. Intelligence suggested their target was inside, possibly with several guards. Used hand signals to position his men around the building. Took his assigned position near the back entrance, but his hands were shaking slightly as he gripped his weapon. Through his night vision goggles, could see movement inside the house. Shadows passed by windows as people moved around. One shadow made him freeze completely. It was a silhouette he recognized, even after all these years. A figure that belonged to a chapter of his life he had tried desperately to close forever. The assault began with precision that only SEALs could achieve. Flashbang grenades shattered the night silence as the team moved into the building from multiple entry points. Followed his training, moving to secure the back rooms while his teammates handled the main assault. But as he entered the house, he was stepping into more than just another mission. He was stepping back into a past that could destroy everything he had built. In the first room, found an elderly woman cowering in the corner. She looked up at him with terrified eyes, speaking rapid words in a language most Americans wouldn't understand, but understood every word perfectly. She was begging him not to hurt her family. She was calling him by a name he hadn't heard in 15 years, a name that made his blood run cold. The woman recognized him despite the years that had passed and the uniform he now wore. She knew him from the time before he became the SEAL medic. She knew him from when he was someone else entirely, someone who had lived in these mountains and spoken this language as fluently as English. Someone who had made choices that would haunt him forever. Tried to calm the woman in English, hoping his teammates wouldn't notice that he understood her native tongue. But she kept speaking to him in her language, becoming more agitated as she realized who he really was. She was telling him that his family had been looking for him. that they knew he was alive somewhere, that they had never stopped searching for the boy who disappeared one night 15 years ago. The sound of gunfire from the front of the house snapped back to the immediate danger. His teammates were engaged with armed resistance. He needed to focus on the mission, not on ghosts from his past. But as he moved through the house, every step felt like he was walking deeper into a trap that had been waiting for him for over a decade. In the main room was zip-tying their captured target when entered. The man on the ground looked up and felt his world tilt on its axis. The high-value target they had been sent to capture was staring at him with eyes full of recognition and something that looked like relief. The man spoke a single word in the local language, a word that meant brother. Noticed the exchange immediately. Years of combat had taught him to pick up on the smallest details that might indicate danger. The way had frozen. The way the prisoner's entire demeanor had changed upon seeing the team's medic. The way both men seemed to know each other in a way that went far beyond this mission. The other team members began to notice the tension as well. The team's communications specialist saw how pale had become. Their explosives expert noticed that was no longer watching the entrances like he should be. Something was very wrong, and in a combat zone, wrong could mean deadly for everyone. Tried to recover his composure, but it was too late. His teammates were trained to notice everything, and they had all seen the recognition between him and the prisoner. Questions were forming in their minds, questions that had hoped would never be asked. Questions about who he really was and why a terrorist leader had called him brother. The extraction was supposed to be routine. Get in, capture the target, get out. But as they prepared to leave the house with their prisoner, knew that nothing would ever be routine again. His past had finally caught up with him, and there was no way to explain what his teammates had witnessed without revealing secrets that could destroy not just his career, but potentially put his entire team in danger. As they moved toward the extraction point, could feel the eyes of his teammates on him, was asking him direct questions about the prisoner's reaction, questions that couldn't answer without lying or revealing the truth. Either choice would have consequences that wasn't prepared to face. The helicopter ride back to base was the longest of his life. Sitting across from the prisoner who knew his real identity, surrounded by teammates who were beginning to suspect that their trusted medic wasn't who he claimed to be, realized that the life he had carefully constructed over the past 15 years was about to crumble. He thought about the day he had escaped from these same mountains as a teenager, fleeing from a world of violence and tribal conflicts that had claimed too many lives in his family. He had made it to America through refugee programs, changed his name, and eventually found his way into the military. He had thought he was starting over completely, but the past has a way of finding you no matter how far you run. Back at the forward operating base, pulled aside before they could debrief the mission. The team leader's expression was serious, the kind of look that had seen when they were about to discuss life-and-death situations. Asked directly if he knew the prisoner from somewhere other than tonight's mission. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Had seconds to decide whether to lie to the man who had trusted him with his life countless times, or to tell the truth and watch everything he had worked for disappear. He looked into his eyes and saw not suspicion, but concern. Wasn't trying to trap him. He was trying to understand what had happened and whether it put the team in danger. For 15 years, had lived with the weight of his secret. He had convinced himself that his past was dead and buried. That was his only identity. But standing in that tent in Afghanistan, looking at his team leader's concerned face, he realized that some truths are too heavy to carry alone forever. The words came out slowly at first, then faster as began to tell about the boy he used to be, about growing up in these same mountains in a family torn apart by tribal warfare, about the violence he had witnessed and the impossible choices he had been forced to make as a child, about the night he decided to flee everything he had ever known in search of a different life. Listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When finished speaking, there was a long silence in the tent. Outside, they could hear the normal sounds of a military base at night, but inside the tent, two men grappled with the implications of secrets revealed and trust that would never be quite the same again. The prisoner they had captured wasn't just any terrorist leader. He was older brother, a man who had chosen a very different path when their family was destroyed by war. While had fled to America seeking peace, his brother had stayed and embraced the cycle of violence that had consumed their homeland. Now, fate had brought them face to face on opposite sides of a conflict that neither had chosen, but both were trapped within. stared at for what felt like an eternity after the revelation. The tent was filled with heavy silence, broken only by the distant sounds of helicopters and generators that never stopped running on a military base. Had led men through countless dangerous situations, but he had never faced anything quite like this. His most trusted medic had just revealed that he was connected by blood to a high-value terrorist target. The implications were staggering. Military protocol demanded immediate action when a soldier's loyalty was in question. Could face court-martial, imprisonment, or worse, but also knew better than anyone on the team. He had watched this man risk his own life to save wounded soldiers. He had seen work tirelessly to patch up coalition forces and even enemy wounded when the situation allowed. Made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Instead of immediately reporting what had told him, he decided to give his medic a chance to explain everything. He needed to understand the full picture before destroying a good man's life and potentially compromising ongoing operations. Told that they would continue this conversation after the prisoner interrogation was complete. The interrogation facility was a sterile building filled with harsh lights and security cameras. His brother, whose name was, sat across from military intelligence officers who had no idea they were questioning someone with a direct family connection to one of their own team members. Watched through a one-way mirror as his brother answered questions about terrorist networks and planned attacks. What heard during that interrogation changed everything he thought he knew about his family's fate. Spoke about searching for his younger brother who had vanished 15 years ago. He described how their village had been destroyed not by American forces, but by rival tribal factions who wanted to eliminate their family's influence in the region. Had fled thinking he was escaping violence, but his departure had actually made things worse for those he left behind. Revealed that their younger sister had been killed in the fighting that followed its disappearance. Their parents had died trying to protect the remaining family members. Had joined extremist groups not out of religious ideology, but out of a desperate desire for revenge against those who had destroyed his family. In his mind, American forces were just another faction in an endless cycle of violence that had consumed his homeland. Felt like he was drowning as he listened to his brother's story. Every choice he had made in his adult life was based on the belief that he had escaped a bad situation and built something better. Now he was learning that his escape had contributed to the destruction of everything he had tried to save. The guilt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a terrible understanding of how his brother had ended up on the opposite side of this war. Observed carefully during the interrogation, he could see the pain on his medic's face as family secrets were revealed in a sterile interrogation room. Began to realize that this situation was far more complicated than a simple case of divided loyalty. This was a family torn apart by forces beyond their control, with brothers who had chosen different paths through an impossible situation. After the interrogation, gathered the rest of SEAL Team 7 for an emergency meeting. He knew he couldn't keep secret much longer, but he also couldn't ignore the potential impact on team morale and mission effectiveness. And the other team members had noticed the unusual interaction during the capture mission, and they were asking direct questions that couldn't answer without revealing confidential information. Decided on a careful approach. He told the team that had recognized the prisoner from his childhood in Afghanistan, but he didn't reveal the full extent of their family relationship. This partial truth satisfied most of the team members, who knew that many Afghan refugees had complex backgrounds that sometimes intersected with military operations. However, remained suspicious and began asking more detailed questions about its past. The situation became more complicated when intelligence officers requested that participate directly in additional interrogations of his brother. They believed his cultural knowledge and language skills could help extract valuable information about terrorist networks. Found himself in an impossible position, being asked to help interrogate his own brother while keeping their relationship secret from his military colleagues. During the first joint interrogation session, sat in the same room as for the first time since they were teenagers. Looked older and harder than remembered by years of conflict and loss. When their eyes met, his expression showed a mixture of love, anger, and betrayal that cut to his core. Had spent 15 years believing his brother was dead, only to discover that had been alive and fighting for the forces considered his enemies. The interrogation was torture for both brothers. Spoke about terrorist operations while staring directly at, as if he was trying to communicate something beyond the words being recorded by intelligence officers. Had to translate his brother's responses while struggling with his own emotions and the weight of family secrets that could never be fully revealed. Intelligence officers were pleased with the breakthrough they achieved using as a cultural interpreter. Provided information about weapons caches and planned attacks that would save American lives, but knew this cooperation came at a terrible personal cost for his brother, who was essentially betraying his chosen cause because he had found his lost family member among his enemies. After several interrogation sessions, made a request that stunned everyone involved. He asked to speak privately with, claiming he had additional information that he would only reveal to the cultural interpreter who had been working with him. Intelligence officers agreed to the private session, not knowing they were arranging a family reunion between two brothers on opposite sides of a war. When they were finally alone in the interrogation room, spoke to in their childhood language, using words and phrases that brought back memories of growing up together in the mountains. Told about the years of searching, the hope that had kept their family going, and the ultimate despair when it became clear that was never coming home. Had joined extremist groups partly because he had lost faith in everything else after losing his family. Also revealed something that changed his understanding of his own escape 15 years earlier. The knight had fled from their village, had helped him, had created a distraction that allowed to slip away unnoticed, had known that staying would likely mean death for, so he had sacrificed his own chance of escape to save his younger brother's life. Was devastated to learn that his brother had always known about his escape and had actually facilitated it. For 15 years, had carried guilt about abandoning his family, not knowing that had willingly helped him leave. Had spent years wondering if his sacrifice had been worthwhile, whether had found the better life that had hoped was possible. The private conversation between the brothers was supposed to last 30 minutes, but it stretched on for hours as they tried to compress 15 years of separation into a single afternoon. Told about their sister's final words, about their parents' hope that would someday return, and about the village celebrations they had held each year on his birthday, believing he would come home. Found himself in the impossible position of explaining his new life to a brother who saw him as a traitor to their homeland and their family's memory. Tried to describe his medical training, his service saving lives in the military, and his hope that he could bridge different worlds through his work, but struggled to understand how could serve forces that blamed for the continued destruction of their homeland. The conversation revealed the fundamental tragedy of their situation. Both brothers had been trying to honor their family's memory in their own ways, through revenge and resistance, through service and healing. Neither path had brought them peace, and their reunion was happening in the worst possible circumstances. As their private conversation came to an end, made a request that would test everything believed about loyalty and duty. Asked to help him escape from American custody, arguing that they owed each other this after 15 years of separation. Promised that he would disappear and never again participate in activities that would harm American forces, but he couldn't accept spending his life in an American prison. Was torn between family loyalty and his oath as an American soldier. He had spent years building trust with his SEAL team and serving his adopted country with honor. But he also couldn't ignore the fact that his brother had sacrificed his own escape to save his life all those years ago. The decision made in the next few hours would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone he cared about. When checked on the interrogation session, he found sitting alone in the room, staring at the empty chair where his brother had been sitting. Had been returned to his cell, but something had clearly changed during their private conversation. Could see the internal struggle playing out on his face and knew that his medic was facing an impossible choice. Made another decision that went against military protocol. Instead of demanding an immediate report about the private interrogation session, he gave 24 hours to think about whatever his brother had asked of him. Understood that some decisions couldn't be rushed, especially when they involved family bonds that had been forged in circumstances most soldiers would never face. That night lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the different paths his life could take from this moment forward. He could report his brother's escape request and continue serving as a loyal American soldier, but he would spend the rest of his life knowing he had chosen duty over the brother who had once saved his life. Or he could find a way to help escape and risk destroying everything he had built in America. As dawn approached, realized that there might be a third option, one that would require him to trust and the rest of his team with the complete truth about his background. It was a dangerous gamble that could end his military career and potentially put his teammates in legal jeopardy. But it might also be the only way to honor both his family obligations and his duty as an American soldier. The decision was about to make would test the bonds of brotherhood that existed within SEAL Team 7 and force his teammates to choose between following regulations and supporting a man who had risked his life for them countless times. Whatever happened next would change all of their lives forever. Found in the early morning hours, sitting alone in the command tent with a cup of coffee and mission reports spread across the table. The team leader looked up as entered, and without a word being spoken, both men knew that this conversation would determine the fate of not just, but potentially the entire team. Set aside his reports and gave his full attention. The story told was complete this time, holding nothing back. He explained about's request for help escaping, about the family history that connected them, and about the impossible choice he was facing between family loyalty and military duty. Listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never expressing judgment about the situation found himself in. When finished speaking, was quiet for a long time, processing the implications of what he had heard. As a team leader, his primary responsibility was to his men and their mission. But as a human being, he understood the complexity of family bonds and the weight of unpaid debts between brothers. Knew that whatever decision was made in the next few hours would define who they all were as men and as soldiers. Made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of ordering to report his brother's escape request through proper channels, called an emergency team meeting. He told that this decision was too important to make alone, and that the entire team needed to understand the situation before anyone moved forward. It was a risky choice that could implicate all of them in whatever happened next. And the other team members gathered in the secure tent, knowing only that had something important to discuss. When began explaining's background and the current situation, the team's reactions were mixed. Was angry that had kept such important information secret. Was concerned about the legal implications for all of them. But gradually, as explained the full context, something unexpected happened. Instead of turning against, the team began to rally around him. These men had served together in the most dangerous places on Earth, trusting each other with their lives on a daily basis. They had watched risk everything to save wounded teammates. They had seen his dedication and courage under fire. The revelation about his background didn't change those experiences or the bonds they had forged together. Was the first to speak up in defense. Despite his initial anger about the secrecy, understood what it meant to carry family burdens while serving in the military. He had his own experiences with divided loyalties and impossible choices. Argued that past didn't define his present loyalty or his value to the team. Raised practical concerns about the legal and operational implications of helping a prisoner escape. But even as he outlined the risks, made it clear that he trusted's judgment about his brother's intentions. Had seen enough of war to understand that enemies weren't always evil, and that sometimes good people ended up on opposite sides of conflicts through circumstances beyond their control. The team spent hours discussing options and alternatives. They considered official channels for addressing situation, including prisoner exchange programs and diplomatic solutions. But every official option would take months or years to resolve, and would likely result in spending decades in American prisons regardless of any future changes in his legal status. Eventually presented the team with a choice that would test everything they believed about loyalty and brotherhood. He proposed a plan that would allow to escape during a carefully orchestrated security failure that could never be traced back to any specific team member. The plan was dangerous and illegal, but it would allow to honor his family obligation while maintaining plausible deniability for everyone involved. The vote wasn't close. Every member of SEAL Team 7 agreed to help, knowing full well the risks they were taking. These men had been forged into a brotherhood through shared danger and mutual sacrifice. They understood that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the same as the legal thing to do, and they trusted's assessment of his brother's character and intentions. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. During next transfer between facilities, there would be a carefully timed equipment failure that would create a window of opportunity for escape. Would be given civilian clothes and enough money to disappear permanently. In exchange, would provide detailed intelligence about terrorist networks that would save American lives for years to come. Was responsible for convincing to accept the plan and its conditions. During their next private meeting, explained that the American soldiers were willing to risk their careers to give a chance at freedom, but that this opportunity came with serious obligations. Would have to disappear completely, never again participate in violence against American or coalition forces, and provide intelligence that would help prevent future terrorist attacks. Was initially suspicious of the offer, wondering why American soldiers would risk so much to help someone they considered an enemy. Explained about the bonds of brotherhood that existed within military units, and how his teammates had chosen to trust based on their trust in. Was moved by this demonstration of loyalty, seeing parallels to the tribal bonds that had defined his own life. The escape plan was executed 3 days later during a routine prisoner transfer. A communications equipment failure created confusion in the convoy's security protocols, and during the resulting chaos, slipped away into the crowded streets of a nearby city. By the time security was restored and the escape was discovered, had vanished completely into the Afghan countryside. The investigation into his escape was thorough but ultimately unsuccessful. Intelligence officers suspected that the equipment failure had been deliberately caused, but they couldn't identify any specific individuals responsible. SEAL Team 7 was questioned extensively, but their stories were consistent and their alibis solid. The investigation eventually concluded that the escape had been the result of security lapses rather than deliberate assistance. Kept his promise to disappear and provide intelligence. Over the following months, American forces received detailed information about terrorist safe houses, weapons caches, and planned attacks. The intelligence was always delivered through untraceable channels, but it was consistently accurate and valuable. Military commanders were pleased with the intelligence windfall, never knowing its true source. Struggled with the aftermath of the escape more than his teammates had expected. While he was relieved that was free and safe, he was also dealing with guilt about deceiving his superiors and potentially compromising military operations. And the team provided support and counseling, helping work through the complex emotions surrounding his choice. The team's dynamic changed in subtle but important ways following the incident. The shared secret created an even deeper bond between the men, but it also created stress and anxiety about potential discovery. They all knew that their actions could be interpreted as treason if the full truth ever came to light, and this knowledge weighed heavily on all of them. Developed new respect for cultural knowledge, and began asking him to help with other missions involving local populations. Found himself thinking more carefully about the human costs of their operations and the complex loyalties that shaped the conflicts they were involved in. Became even more protective of his team, knowing that they had all taken extraordinary risks based on their trust in each other. 6 months after his escape, received an unexpected message through secure channels. It was from, confirming that he was safe and had started a new life far from the conflicts that had shaped his past. Reported that he was working with refugee organizations to help other war victims find peaceful solutions to their circumstances. Most importantly, expressed gratitude for the second chance his brother and the American soldiers had given him. The message also contained information that vindicated the team's decision to help escape. Reported that several terrorist attacks had been prevented based on the intelligence he had provided, saving numerous American and civilian lives. Was using his insider knowledge of extremist networks to actively work against the violence he had once participated in. Shared this message with his teammates, providing closure that they all needed. Knowing that their illegal actions had ultimately saved lives helped justify the risks they had taken. The team realized that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen in secret, when good people choose to do what's right regardless of personal consequences. As their deployment neared its end, SEAL Team 7 reflected on how the experience had changed them all. They had faced an impossible situation that tested their values, their loyalty, and their courage in ways that no training could have prepared them for. They had chosen brotherhood over regulations, compassion over duty, and trust over safety. Continued serving as the team's medic for 2 more years, eventually earning commendations for his service and his contributions to successful missions throughout the Middle East. His teammates never revealed the secret of his escape, and never again encountered situations where his past conflicted with his present duties. The team remained close even after their military service ended, bound together by shared experiences that most people could never understand. The story of SEAL Team 7 and the prisoner escape became a legend within certain military circles, though the details were never officially recorded. It represented the complex moral choices that soldiers sometimes face when regulations and humanity conflict with each other. It demonstrated that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is knowing when to break the rules in service of higher principles. Years later, learned that had indeed built a peaceful life, working with international relief organizations and using his experience to help other former combatants find alternatives to violence. Had and started a family, something that would never have been possible if he had spent his life in an American prison. The knowledge that his brother had found peace helped find peace with his own choices. Went on to command other special operations units, always remembering the lesson he learned about the importance of understanding the whole person behind the uniform. He became known for his ability to handle complex situations involving cultural and family conflicts, drawing on his experience with and to help other soldiers navigate similar challenges. The bonds forged between the members of SEAL Team 7 lasted for the rest of their lives. They had shared something that went beyond normal military brotherhood, having chosen to trust each other with secrets that could have destroyed them all. Their willingness to risk everything for one team member's family obligation created a standard of loyalty that influenced every subsequent relationship they formed. In the end, the story of SEAL Team 7 demonstrated that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the conflicting loyalties and impossible choices that define what it means to be human. Their decision to help escape was illegal by military standards, but it was also an act of profound moral courage that honored the best traditions of brotherhood and service. The pain that had silenced for so many years was finally resolved not through military protocols or official channels, but through the understanding and sacrifice of brothers who chose to trust each other when trust seemed impossible. In helping find freedom, they had all found a different kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from knowing they had chosen compassion over convenience and humanity over regulations when it mattered most.